For 30 years, Nancy Guthrie lived a life that looked honest, open, and deeply grounded. She was respected, trusted, admired. People believed they knew her, not just her work, but her values, her story, her heart. Nothing about her suggested secrecy. Nothing hinted at a hidden past. And that's what makes the truth so unsettling. Behind the calm voice and composed presence was a reality no one ever suspected. A second life carefully buried beneath routines, discipline, and silence. For 3 decades, Nancy carried a truth she believed could never be spoken out loud, one that shaped every decision she made and every boundary she kept. This wasn't a careless secret. It was a controlled one. Every word was measured, every personal detail carefully filtered. She didn't lie loudly, she simply left things out. And no one questioned her, because she gave them no reason to. The image she presented was too consistent, too believable. But secrets don't disappear with time, they wait. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just surprise people, it forced them to rethink everything they thought they knew. Conversations from the past suddenly felt different. Moments once seen as ordinary took on new meaning. The woman they trusted wasn't a stranger, but she wasn't fully who they thought she was either. Because sometimes, the most shocking secrets aren't hidden in darkness, they're hidden in plain sight. And now, after 30 years of silence, Nancy Guthrie's secret life is finally out, and nothing will ever look the same again. For most of her adult life, Nancy Guthrie was seen as a woman of clarity and conviction. She spoke with purpose, lived with structure, and carried herself with a confidence that reassured everyone around her. People believed she was exactly who she appeared to be: steady, thoughtful, and authentic. And for the most part, she was. But authenticity doesn't always mean completeness. Nancy understood early on that some truths change everything once they're spoken. So she made a decision quietly, deliberately, to keep part of her life private. Not temporarily, not until the right moment, but indefinitely. The public version of Nancy was carefully built over time. It wasn't fake, but it was curated. She shared what felt safe. She opened up just enough to appear transparent, while keeping deeper layers carefully protected. Most people never noticed the difference, because the version they saw was real, just incomplete. Her days followed predictable rhythms. Routines gave her control. Structure gave her safety. The more consistent her life appeared, the less anyone questioned what lay beneath it. And Nancy relied on that. Conversations were navigated with precision. If someone asked about her past, she focused on the parts that aligned with the story she was comfortable telling. If a topic drifted too close to dangerous territory, she redirected smoothly. A thoughtful smile, a change of subject, a partial truth. No one pushed. Why would they? She gave no reason for doubt. But living with a secret for 30 years isn't just about hiding information, it's about living with constant awareness. Nancy always knew where the lines were. She knew what could be said and what never could. That awareness followed her everywhere, quietly shaping how close she allowed people to get. The cost of that distance was loneliness, even in meaningful relationships. There was always a boundary she couldn't cross. People felt close to her but never fully inside her world. And over time, that separation became normal, necessary even. Nancy told herself she was protecting everyone, protecting relationships from confusion, protecting her work from distraction, protecting herself from consequences she couldn't predict. And for years, that belief held firm. But time has a way of changing perspective. As the years passed, the secret didn't grow, but its weight did. Memories resurfaced more often. The effort of silence became heavier. What once felt manageable began to feel exhausting. At night, when the world was quiet, Nancy replayed moments from her past, the choices she made, the truth she locked away. She wondered who she might have been if she had chosen honesty instead of control. But fear always followed that thought. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of judgment, fear of losing the trust she had worked so hard to build. So she stayed silent. Until silence was no longer enough. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And after 30 years, Nancy Guthrie was unknowingly approaching the moment when the life everyone believed in would finally collide with the life she had hidden. And when that happened, everything would change. For years, Nancy Guthrie believed silence was her greatest protection. As long as she stayed disciplined, as long as she controlled the narrative, the two lives she lived would never collide. And for a long time, that belief held steady. But cracks don't appear all at once. They form quietly. The first signs were so subtle that even Nancy tried to dismiss them. A question asked with a little more curiosity than usual. A memory resurfacing at the wrong moment. A name from the past mentioned casually, yet powerful enough to tighten her chest. None of it was enough to expose the truth, but it was enough to remind her how fragile her control really was. She began to feel tired in a way she hadn't before. Not physically, emotionally. Maintaining the boundary between what could be shared and what had to remain hidden started to require more effort than it once did. Conversations that used to feel easy now demanded focus. She replayed them afterward, checking for mistakes, wondering if she had revealed too much or paused too long. People around her sensed something had changed. Nancy was still present, still composed, but there was a new hesitation beneath her calm. She listened more than she spoke. She avoided certain topics altogether. When discussions drifted toward the past, she subtly withdrew, choosing silence over risk. Those closest to her noticed the distance, though they couldn't explain it. They assumed she was reflecting, maybe overwhelmed, maybe just tired. After all, Nancy had always been thoughtful. No one suspected fear, but fear had become a constant companion. At night, when distractions faded, the secret grew louder. Memories she had buried resurfaced with uncomfortable clarity. She replayed the moment she first decided to keep that part of her life hidden. How necessary it had felt at the time. How permanent it had become without her realizing it. 30 years is a long time to carry one truth alone. Nancy began to ask herself questions she had avoided for decades. What would happen if people knew? Would they feel betrayed? Would they question everything she had said before? Or worse, would they reduce her entire life to the secret she had worked so hard to protect? The fear wasn't just about exposure. It was about identity. If the truth came out, who would she be to them then? The version of herself that existed in public spaces had become familiar, even comforting to others and to herself. Letting go of that version felt like stepping into uncertainty without protection. And yet, the cracks kept widening. A conversation here, a coincidence there, a reminder that time doesn't erase the past, it only distances us from it temporarily. Nancy realized she was no longer the only variable in the equation. Other people carried pieces of the story too. Even if they didn't fully understand them, that realization unsettled her more than anything else. For the first time, control felt like an illusion. She found herself standing at a crossroads she never planned to reach. One path led to continued silence, a familiar road, but one growing heavier with every step. The other led to truth uncertain, frightening, and irreversible. Some days, she convinced herself she could hold on a little longer, that the cracks weren't serious, that discipline would save her again. Other days, she felt something else creeping in, relief. The idea of no longer hiding, no longer editing herself began to feel tempting. Dangerous, but freeing. She imagined conversations without calculation, relationships without limits, a life where her past didn't need to be guarded like a threat. But courage didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly, disguised as exhaustion. Nancy didn't know exactly when the moment would come. She only knew it was closer than it had ever been before. The balance she had maintained for 30 years was shifting, and no amount of control could stop it. Because the truth wasn't knocking anymore. It was waiting. And when it finally stepped into the light, it would force everyone, including Nancy, to see her life for what it truly was. Nancy Guthrie had always believed that if the truth ever came out, it would be because she chose the moment, that she would control the timing, the words, the setting. After all, control had protected her for 30 years. But the truth doesn't always wait for permission. The moment arrived not with drama, but with inevitability. A quiet realization settled over her. This wasn't something she could manage anymore. The secret had grown too large, too present. It followed her into conversations, interrupted her thoughts, and lived just beneath every interaction. What once felt contained now felt alive. Nancy felt it most in the pauses. Pauses where words used to come easily. Pauses where she hesitated, weighing truth against safety. Pauses that stretched long enough for others to notice. For the first time, silence worked against her. There was one conversation in particular that changed everything. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't confrontational. It was honest, almost innocent. A question asked without suspicion, but with sincerity. The kind of question that touches history without realizing how dangerous that ground can be. Nancy felt her chest tighten. For years, she would have answered automatically, redirected, smiled, moved on. But this time, something stopped her. Not fear but exhaustion. The kind that comes when you've been strong for too long. She realized, in that moment, that continuing to hide would cost her more than telling the truth ever could. The room felt smaller. Time slowed. She could feel the weight of 30 years pressing against her ribs. Every instinct told her to protect herself, to stay within the boundaries she had built so carefully. But another voice, quiet, steady, rose above the fear. Enough. Nancy spoke. Not all at once. Not dramatically. She didn't unload 3 decades of silence in a single breath. Instead, she opened a door she had kept locked for most of her life. She chose honesty over perfection, vulnerability over control. The truth didn't explode into the room. It settled. There was silence afterward, the heavy kind. Not disbelief, not anger, but processing. Faces changed. Expressions softened. The image people had carried of Nancy didn't shatter, but it shifted. And that shift changed everything. Questions followed, gently at first. Clarifications, pauses. Nancy answered what she could. Some things were still too raw, too personal. But she didn't retreat. She stayed present. For the first time, she didn't measure every word with fear. What surprised her most was the absence of rejection. There was shock, yes. 30 years of secrecy doesn't land lightly. But there was also understanding. People didn't see betrayal, they saw a woman who had carried something heavy for a very long time. Later, alone, the release hit her all at once. Her hands shook. Her breath came unevenly. The strength she had relied on for decades finally loosened its grip. She wasn't falling apart, she was letting go. For the first time in 30 years. Nancy wasn't managing 2 lives, she was living one. But truth doesn't only bring relief, it brings consequence. Nancy knew this moment would reshape her relationships. Some people would need distance. Others would need time. Trust, once simple, would now require rebuilding. She accepted that. The truth demanded responsibility, and she was ready to carry it. What mattered most was this: the secret no longer owned her. She thought back to the woman she had been 30 years earlier, the one who believed silence was the safest choice. She understood her now, understood the fear, understood the survival, but she also knew something that woman couldn't have known. Then, silence protects you for a while, truth sets you free. The life Nancy Guthrie had hidden for 30 years wasn't erased by exposure. It was finally acknowledged, integrated, understood. And while the world around her adjusted to this new reality, Nancy felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because nothing was hidden anymore. And that made all the difference. Here is Chapter 4, 600 to 700 words, the aftermath, emotional consequences, and a powerful closing. Chapter 4. After the secret was finally out, when the truth about Nancy Guthrie's hidden life finally surfaced, the world didn't collapse the way she had feared it might, but it didn't remain the same either. Exposure doesn't always destroy, it reshapes. And for Nancy, that reshaping touched every corner of her life. The first days were the hardest. There were conversations filled with silence, pauses where words struggled to form. Some people didn't know what to say at all. 30 years of secrecy forced them to revisit memories they thought they understood. Moments that once felt simple now carried weight. Familiar stories sounded different when heard through the lens of truth. A few people pulled back, not out of anger, but confusion. They needed time. Trust, once effortless, now required rebuilding. Nancy didn't blame them. She had lived with this truth for decades. They had only just received it. Others surprised her. Instead of judgment, they offered compassion. Instead of disappointment, they expressed understanding. They saw not deception, but endurance. Not manipulation, but survival. Many admitted they couldn't imagine carrying something so heavy for so long. For the first time, Nancy allowed herself to receive that understanding. Still, freedom came with vulnerability, without the secret to guard. Nancy felt exposed in a way she never had before. The silence that once protected her had also given her structure. Now, she had to learn who she was without constant restraint. There were moments of uncertainty, moments when she wondered how to speak without editing herself, how to trust without fear. But there was also relief. She slept differently, breathed differently, laughed without calculation. The mental effort she had carried for 30 years was gone, and in its absence, she felt lighter even when conversations were difficult. Nancy also faced herself in new ways. She reflected on the years spent hiding, not with shame, but with clarity. She understood why she made the choice she did. She recognized the strength it took to survive in silence, and the courage it took to finally break it. Both were real. Both mattered. The truth didn't erase her past. It completed it. Over time, relationships began to settle into something more honest. Some grew deeper than before. Others changed shape. A few faded. That loss hurt, but it felt different now. It wasn't rooted in fear, but acceptance. Nancy no longer measured her life by how well she could protect herself. She measured it by how fully she could show up. For 30 years, the secret had defined the limits of her world. Now, even with uncertainty ahead, those limits were gone. She could speak freely, remember openly, exist without guarding every detail of her story. And perhaps the most unexpected outcome was this: people didn't see her as less trustworthy. They saw her as more human. At the end of it all, Nancy Guthrie didn't regret telling the truth. She regretted only how long she believed she had to carry it alone. Silence had kept her safe, but it had also kept her isolated. Truth gave her something better: connection. At peace with her past and present, Nancy stepped into the future not as two separate lives, but as one whole person. The secret that once defined her no longer held power over her name, her work, or her relationships. For 30 years, she had a secret life. Now, with the truth finally out, she wasn't exposed. She was free.